I used to think death would come as a sudden blackout, a clean cut between one frame and the next. Turns out it's not like that at all. It's more like a static hum, a long, slow dissolve between two worlds that refuse to let you go. It was supposed to be a simple escort mission. My unit was deployed to retrieve classified prototypes from a bombed research base somewhere along the southern border. I was the only engineer in the convoy, the guy who designed the thing we were trying to protect. They called it the Whisper, a guidance chip small enough to fit in a bullet, smart enough to pick its own target. I had spent 3 years of my life designing something I secretly hoped would never work. The desert that day was a silent graveyard of twisted steel and glass. Sunlight hit the metal shards like mirrors, 1,000 little suns scattered across the dunes. The wind carried the dry hiss of sand against armor, and every step sounded like walking through time itself. I remember Lieutenant Harris shouting from the lead Humvee, "Keep your head down, genius. You're worth more than the rest of us combined." He laughed, but it wasn't a joke. Soldiers joked to fill the silence between fear and fate. We passed a crater the size of a swimming pool, the edges still black from a blast that must have happened hours earlier. The heat shimmered above it like the air itself was melting. I glanced down at the metal casing inside my bag, the Whisper, and wondered how many lives it would end before someone decided it was obsolete. A drone buzzed overhead. The comms crackled. Someone cursed. Then came the sound, that hollow click that makes your stomach drop before your mind catches up. I didn't even have time to breathe. The explosion didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like the world inhaling, a deep, impossible vacuum pulling everything into silence. The Humvee lifted off the ground. Time stretched like rubber. I saw Harris's helmet spin away in slow motion, the visor catching the sunlight one last time before vanishing into the white. Then came darkness. Not the comforting kind, the kind that pressed against my eyelids like a living thing. I thought that was it, but there was something strange about dying. The darkness wasn't empty. It moved and like waves on black water. Beneath it, I felt something pulling me down, a gravity that wasn't physical. My body was gone, but my mind was wide awake. Then came the cold. Not desert cold, deeper, older, like I'd fallen into the shadow of time itself. I heard voices, muffled, foreign. Someone shouted, "Fetch the healer!" Another voice, young and trembling, "He's still breathing." Light stabbed into my eyes. The world snapped back. I was lying on rough stone. A ceiling made of timber beams loomed above me. My whole body ached, but it wasn't my body. My hands, they were thinner, calloused, wrapped in leather. My chest felt lighter, my breath sharper. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd been captured. Maybe this was an enemy outpost, and they'd put me in some kind of medieval cosplay cell to mess with my head. But when I tried to sit up, the pain shot through me so violently I nearly blacked out again. A figure leaned over me, a young woman dressed in linen and silver embroidery. Her eyes were sharp but kind, and she spoke a language I didn't understand, soft and rhythmic like a song. Her hand touched my forehead, and I caught a faint scent of herbs and iron. Then she said something that I did understand. Just one word. "Guard." She looked at me not as a stranger, but as someone she already knew. Behind her, a man in armor stepped forward, tall, heavy, with a scar down his cheek. He stared at me like I'd risen from the dead. Maybe I had. "Sir Alden," he said slowly, "you took a hard fall. The princess ordered me to keep you alive. Can you hear me?" Alden, that was my name now. My voice cracked like dry leaves. Where am I?" He frowned as if the question itself were absurd. "In the royal quarters, of course. You saved Her Highness during the ambush. The arrow missed your heart by a hand's breadth." I tried to laugh, but my throat only managed to croak. My mind spun. Royal quarters. Princess. Arrow. It didn't make sense. I remembered sand, trucks, explosions, not bows and castles. The man, the captain, I guessed, noticed my confusion. Rest, Sir Alden. You're lucky to be alive. He turned to the young woman, the princess, and bowed deeply before leaving us alone. For a long moment, she just stood there, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. The room smelled of lavender smoke and burning tallow. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of bells and hooves, and people calling in a language that seemed ancient, yet strangely familiar. She said something again, slower this time, almost testing me. I couldn't understand. I just stared at her, trying to piece together reality. Her brow furrowed slightly, then she pressed a hand against my chest, right where the pain pulsed hardest. Her touch was warm. For some reason, it calmed me. When she left, I stared at the flickering candlelight and tried to remember who I was. My name was Captain Elias Ward, engineer, 4th Division, United Earth Forces, 38 years old. I built machines of precision and death. And now, I was a medieval knight recovering from an arrow wound, being cared for by a princess. Insanity had never felt so detailed. I tried to move my fingers to test the weight of this new body. They worked, though the scars were in all the wrong places. The hands of a swordsman, not a scientist. The knuckles thick, the nails chipped. Every detail was too real to be a dream. Outside the window, I saw a castle courtyard. Stone walls, banners fluttering in the wind, men training with spears and shields. A blacksmith's hammer echoed from somewhere below. The smell of forge smoke drifted in, mingling with the sharp scent of pine. I remember whispering to myself, either I'm dead, or I've just been drafted into history. I tried to stand, but the world tilted. My vision went white again, then blurred into gray. Somewhere in that haze, I thought I heard the princess's voice, faint, like an echo underwater. And then came the strangest thing of all. In the darkness, I saw fire, but not from battlefields or explosions. It was the glow of a forge, molten and alive. Shapes moved within it. Cannons, gears, tools. My designs. My hands, though not mine, shaping metal with purpose. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory that didn't belong to me. And in that moment, I understood one terrifying truth. Wherever I wasn't just living in another man's body. I was living in his destiny. The first real morning in that world came with pain, the kind that doesn't fade when you open your eyes. It hums beneath the skin, constant and mean, reminding you that this is no dream. I woke to sunlight spilling through stained glass. The light bent in colors I hadn't seen since childhood. Raw, unfiltered daylight, the kind that burns truth into everything it touches. A low crackle of fire echoed from the hearth nearby. My body was drenched in sweat. Someone had removed the bandages on my chest, and a red scar crossed where the arrow had nearly claimed me. Outside, the sound of training drifted through the window, swords striking shields, men shouting orders. I dragged myself to the edge of the bed and stared at the armor resting on a wooden chair. Old steel, polished by hands that cared. The blue sash draped across it carried a crest, a silver hawk clutching a sword. That's when the door opened. The same princess stepped in, holding a tray of bread, herbs, and water. She moved like someone used to silence, light on her feet, precise in motion. For a second, I thought she was just another hallucination. But when she saw me awake, her face broke into relief so honest it made me forget my confusion. She said something softly in her language. I caught none of it, but her tone was careful, deliberate, as if she was testing whether I was truly alive. I tried to speak. I don't understand you. Her eyes widened slightly. Then she set the tray down and said slowly, Alden. I hesitated, then nodded. It was easier to play along than to explain reincarnation over breakfast. She smiled faintly, a small, restrained curve of the lips. Then she pointed at the tray and gestured for me to eat. The bread was coarse, the water lukewarm, but I devoured it like it was the first meal of my life. Hunger, it turns out, doesn't care which century you're in. After a while, she spoke again, this time forming each word as if chiseling it out of stone. You live, I nodded. Apparently, she frowned slightly, not angry, just studying the way I spoke, the shape of my words. Then in halting effort, she said, you speak strangely. You have no idea, I muttered. She blinked, clearly not catching the meaning, then turned toward the window. Outside, the training field gleamed under sunlight. She watched for a moment before whispering something that sounded almost like a prayer. Then she looked back at me, her voice low. War. Soon. That I understood. I sat there, feeling the weight of it settle into my chest. Even here, in a world that felt like a painting come alive, war was the same. Always waiting, always hungry. I glanced again at the armor. It felt both alien and familiar, like muscle memory from a life I hadn't lived. When I touched the hilt of the sword, a sharp image flashed in my head. My hands, Alden's hands, cutting through smoke and chaos. Battle memories that weren't mine but lived in me now. The princess noticed. You remember? I shook my head. Not really, just fragments. She stepped closer, studying me again. Curious, cautious. Her voice softened. You saved me, she said, pressing a hand to her chest. I owe you my life. I tried to smile, but it came out wrong. Seems like a fair trade. You're giving it back. She tilted her head, not understanding. Still, something in my tone must have reached her, because she smiled anyway. Then she turned to leave. Before stepping through the door, she looked back once more and said something that lingered long after she was gone. I didn't know the words, but I recognized the tone. Gratitude mixed with duty. The sound of someone already bearing too much weight for her age. Later that day, a man entered. Older, broad-shouldered, with the posture of command. His armor was marked by use, and his beard was streaked with gray. He introduced himself as Captain Rorik, commander of the Royal Guard. Her Highness tells me you've lost your memory, he said, his tone rough but not unkind. You're lucky she pleaded for your life. The healer thought you wouldn't survive the night. I nodded slowly. I owe her more than I can say. He crossed his arms. You owe her loyalty and silence. What you saw during the attack must remain between us. I saw arrows and blood, I said, and too many dead. His eyes narrowed, searching my face. Alden, you were one of our best swordsmen. If your mind's gone soft, say it now. We can't afford weakness in the guard. The weight of his stare pinned me. I wasn't Alden. I wasn't a soldier of this world. But if I wanted to live long enough to understand what had happened to me, I'd have to become him. I'll recover, I said firmly. He held my gaze a moment longer, then nodded. Good. The king will want to see you when you can walk. There are questions only you can answer. After he left, I stood by the window again, looking out over the training yard. The men below practiced with wooden pikes and shields. Primitive by any standard I knew, but disciplined. Beyond the walls stretched a valley of golden fields, and in the distance, black smoke rose from the borderlands. War soon, she'd said. That night I couldn't sleep. The sounds of the castle, footsteps, torches, distant voices, all pressed against my thoughts. I needed to think, to calculate. If this was real, if I had truly crossed into another world, another body, then survival meant adaptation. I'd been a systems engineer long enough to know. Every machine, every society follows rules. Even here, under banners and crowns, there had to be logic hidden beneath the myth. I rummaged through the chest beside my bed and found parchment, quills, and a block of charcoal. Then by firelight, I began to sketch. Gunpowder. The formula surfaced in my mind effortlessly. Saltpeter, sulfur, charcoal, ratios, burn rates, containment pressure. I noted it all down, though the materials here would be crude at best. Still, even a flawed mixture could change everything. The idea terrified me, but it also gave me purpose. If this kingdom was facing war, then knowledge was the only weapon I had. By dawn, my hands were black with soot and ink. My first crude diagram of a cannon stared back at me. Ugly, primitive, but possible. I leaned back, exhausted, and whispered into the quiet. History gave me a second chance. Maybe this time I can build something that saves instead of destroys. Outside, the first horns of morning echoed across the valley, and somewhere down the hall, I heard the princess's voice, clear, commanding, unafraid. For the first time since the explosion, I believed I might actually belong to this world. Days bled into one another inside that castle of stone and silence. My body healed, but my mind refused to rest. Every morning I watched the soldiers drill from the balcony, spears glinting in the light, armor creaking like old machinery. I studied their formations, their rhythm. It was all muscle, no science. The engineer in me itched to improve everything. Rorik visited often, always reminding me that I was a hero of the crown who ought to be grateful. Grateful. That word carried the same bitter taste here as it did back home. Gratitude was what generals demanded before sending you back into fire. On the seventh morning, a boy in a page's tunic brought me a bundle, my armor, newly repaired, and a scroll sealed with the royal crest. The letter summoned me to an audience with the king. I was still learning how to walk without staggering when they led me through the marble halls. The air smelled of incense and iron polish. Knights bowed as I passed, though their eyes betrayed doubt. Rumors had begun to spread that Sir Alden had risen from the dead, that the princess had touched him and drawn him back. When the throne room doors opened, I felt the weight of 50 eyes. The king sat on a dais of black stone, his crown less a symbol of glory than of exhaustion. He looked like a man who'd buried too many sons. "Sir Alden," he said, voice gravel and command, "they tell me you fought as 10 men that night. You saved my daughter's life." I bowed, unsure what to say. I was trying to survive, would have been honest, but suicide in any century. "You were struck by an arrow," he continued, "yet your wound closed before sunrise. My healers call it a miracle." I forced a small smile. Perhaps it was. The king's gaze sharpened. "Do you believe in miracles, Sir Alden?" The question hung there, heavy as armor. Back home, belief was a luxury. I'd seen too much death under fluorescent light to believe in anything that couldn't be measured. Yet standing in that hall, in a world carved from myth, I realized truth was a matter of geography. "I believe," I said carefully, "that every miracle begins with a man who refuses to die." The king studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then may your stubbornness serve the crown again. War brews on our borders. I need every man who can hold a sword and every mind that can build." That last word, build, made something stir inside me. "Yes, Your Majesty," I said, "I can build." That night, they moved me from the infirmary to the barracks. The men treated me with wary respect. To them, I was half legend, half ghost. Around the fire, they whispered stories about the attack. Arrows raining from the trees, a flash of light that saved the princess. They said it came from me. I didn't bother correcting them. Instead, I spent my nights sketching again. On parchment stolen from the scribes' quarters, I drew rough blueprints of what this world could become. Simple pulleys, better armor plating, primitive mortar tubes. All the while, a voice in my head kept whispering, "You're repeating history. You're arming the past with the sins of the future." The princess found me one evening, hunched over the table, ink smudged across my hands. You work as if chased by demons, she said in that accented English she was slowly mastering. Maybe I am, I replied. She stepped closer, her gaze falling on the sketches. These are weapons? I hesitated. Tools. Tools for survival. She studied the designs, tracing the outline of a cannon with her finger. No one has seen such a thing. What do you call it? Cannon, I said quietly. It throws fire farther than any archer can dream. Her brow furrowed. And what becomes of the world when men can throw fire so far? I had no answer. In my old life, I used to justify destruction with words like defense, strategy, deterrence. Here, stripped of bureaucracy, the truth sounded uglier. I don't know, I said. Maybe the same thing that's always become of it. She looked at me then, not as a guard, not even as a soldier, but as something dangerous. And yet there was curiosity in her eyes too. You speak like a priest who's lost his faith. I smiled faintly. No, like an engineer who found out God is just bad at math. Her laughter startled me. It was soft but alive, a sound that didn't belong in a world at war. For a moment, the distance between us felt fragile enough to cross. But then she turned serious again. You must be careful. The king's court does not welcome miracles they cannot control. They call such things heresy. I've been called worse, I said. She hesitated at the door. Still, be careful, Sir Alden. A mind too bright can burn its owner. When she left, the room felt colder. Over the next weeks, I began experimenting in secret with the black powder formula. The castle's forge master, a grizzled man named Harlan, agreed to help after I convinced him it was for fireworks to honor the princess's recovery. We worked by torchlight, grinding saltpeter and charcoal, mixing sulfur in careful measure. The first tests were small, sparks, smoke, nothing catastrophic. But I knew the potential waiting in those handfuls of dust. Harlan didn't. He only marveled at the flame and said, "The gods themselves will envy this fire." I wished I could share his wonder. To me it was déjà vu, the same awe that had once built empires and graves. Late one night, while cleaning the forge, I caught sight of myself in a polished shield. The face staring back was not my own. Younger, harder. But behind the eyes, I recognized something unchanged. The quiet exhaustion of a man who has built too much destruction. That's when I realized the cruel symmetry of it all. Back home, I'd built machines for generals. Here I was building weapons for kings. Different uniforms, same hunger. And yet, when I thought of the princess's voice, the way she had said, "Fire farther than any archer can dream," something in me wanted to believe this time could be different. Maybe invention wasn't cursed. Maybe its curse was the people who used it. That night I made a promise to the stranger in the mirror. If I was truly trapped in this world, I would build, but not for glory, not for kings. I would build to protect the one person who had looked at me and seen more than a weapon. The forge roared, casting long shadows across the walls. Somewhere outside, church bells rang midnight, and I realized what kind of story I was now living. Not the tale of a soldier reborn, but of a man trying to earn his second soul. The forge was my confessional. Every night after the castle slept, I'd slip past the guards and light the coals. Harlan kept watch at the door while I worked, grinding powder, shaping barrels, carving wooden mounts. He didn't ask questions. Old soldiers never do. They've learned that silence is a better armor than truth. The first cannon was crude, barely more than a metal tube reinforced with iron bands. We called it the dragon's breath because of the way it spat fire when I tested a small charge inside. The sound shook the rafters. The recoil nearly broke my wrist. But it worked. Proof that this world could be changed by force and formula. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt the same hollow unease that haunted me in the desert. the sense that every discovery comes with a ghost. We hid the prototype beneath the forge floor, wrapped in tarps and gilt. Only Harlan and I knew, or so I thought. 2 nights later, during a calibration test, the powder flared too hot. The blast shattered a support beam and sent molten metal flying. The sound echoed through the sleeping city like thunder. When the smoke cleared, one of Harlan's apprentices lay motionless, a boy no older than 16, his hair burned, his chest still. Harlan dropped to his knees, muttering prayers. I stood frozen, staring at my hands. In another life, I had written reports about collateral damage. Now I was watching it breathe its last at my feet. By dawn, the guards came. The king's inquisitor, a gaunt man in black robes, dragged us to the courtyard. The air was heavy with incense and suspicion. A crowd gathered, soldiers, servants, even priests. Whispers rippled like cold wind. Witchcraft, forbidden fire, the devil's forge. The inquisitor held up a piece of scorched metal. This is not the work of a smith, he declared. This is heresy, the theft of flame from the gods. I tried to speak, but he silenced me with a raised hand. The princess's guard playing with demon fire, a fitting tale for fools. Before he could say more, she appeared. The princess crossed the courtyard like a streak of light cutting through fog. Her hair was unbound, her expression calm but sharp. Explain yourself, she said to me, not unkindly. I bowed my head. It was an accident, Your Highness. I was building a weapon to defend the kingdom. Murmurs erupted. The inquisitor laughed. He admits his sin. But the princess did not flinch. And you, she said to him, would rather hang a man who seeks to protect us than listen to reason? Her words silenced the courtyard. Even the inquisitor hesitated. No one defied the princess, not openly. Then she turned to me. Show me. The command left no room for hesitation. With shaking hands, I led her and the court guard back to the forge. I pulled away the tarps, revealing the dragon's breath. Its iron surface glinted with soot and promise. This device, I said, can hurl iron farther than a catapult. It could end battles before they begin. The princess studied it closely. And how do you control such power? With knowledge, I said, and restraint. Her eyes lifted to mine. Restraint is not the gift of kings, Sir Alden, nor of men. I had no answer. The inquisitor seized the moment. Blasphemy disguised as wisdom. He consorts with dark forces. The boy who died is proof of divine wrath. The king arrived then, summoned by the commotion. His gaze fell on me with the same weary weight he gave the condemned. Alden, he said slowly, I rewarded you for saving my daughter, and this is how you repay my mercy? Your Majesty, I said, voice raw, I only sought to give you an advantage against the enemy. They have numbers. You have me. He stared at the cannon for a long time, his jaw tightening. Then finally he spoke. Lock him in the Eastern Tower. If his invention is truth, it will prove itself in war. If not, the flames will judge him first. Harlan tried to protest, but was silenced by a blow. They dragged me away in chains. The tower was cold and windowless. Days passed like seasons. My only company was the echo of my thoughts and the faint memory of her voice, that strange balance of empathy and command. Sometimes I wondered if she still believed me innocent, or if she'd filed me away as another failed experiment of fate. Then one night the lock turned. The princess entered, cloaked in gray. She held a candle and a key. You're lucky, she whispered. My father wants to destroy your weapon. I convinced him to wait. I sat up slowly. Why would you risk that? She hesitated. Because I've seen what you can do. Because I want to understand it. Her curiosity was genuine, dangerous but real. I told her about pressure and trajectory, about fire as both tool and curse. She listened with the patience of a scholar, her eyes reflecting the candlelight like mirrors of thought. At one point, she said softly, "Where did you learn these things? Not even our greatest scholars know such craft." I met her gaze. "Let's just say I come from a world that worships progress until it forgets what it's for." She frowned. "And did your world find what it was looking for?" I smiled faintly. "No, just better ways to lose itself." For a moment, silence filled the room. Not awkward, but alive. She looked at me as though trying to read something behind my eyes. "You speak with sadness," she said. "I speak with memory." She placed the candle on the floor, the flame trembling. "Then maybe your memories are what this kingdom needs." Before leaving, she handed me a small parchment, my release order, signed in her hand. "Prove your weapon can protect, not destroy," she said, "or it will be the end of you." When the door closed behind her, I stared at that piece of parchment for a long time. It was freedom, but also a sentence. I thought of the boy who died. I thought of Harlan's trembling hands. And I thought of her, the only person in this world who didn't treat me as miracle or monster. The forge awaited. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, not from the sky, but from distant drums of war. I whispered to the darkness, "Then let's see what kind of God we make this time." They say war announces itself in whispers long before the horns ever sound. In the weeks that followed my release, those whispers grew into thunder. Riders returned from the borderlands with blackened armor and hollow eyes. Villages had fallen, the enemy's banners, red sun on white field, already seen from the watchtowers. The king's council demanded answers, strategies, miracles. I had one to offer, and they feared it. The courtyard became my proving ground. The dragon's breath stood ready, now refined and polished, its barrel braced by iron hoops in a frame of seasoned oak. Harlan and I had rebuilt it twice under the princess's quiet protection. The soldiers gathered to watch, murmuring prayers as though the weapon itself might awaken some sleeping god. The king arrived in full armor, flanked by his advisors. The princess rode beside him, her gaze steady, unreadable. "This contraption of yours," the king said, "had better roar louder than the enemy." I nodded. "It will, your majesty, but I must ask everyone to stand back. She bites." Laughter rippled through the crowd, nervous, uncertain. We loaded the cannon with a stone shot the size of a melon, tamped the powder, and packed the fuse. I took a breath, the air thick with smoke and skepticism. Then I lit the match. The explosion was not a sound. It was a force, a hammer made of thunder. The cannon bucked, smoke devoured the field, and the echo rolled across the valley like a storm breaking free. When the air cleared, the target wall 100 yards away lay in ruin. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the soldiers erupted in cheers. The king stared, eyes wide, awe drowning out fear. "By the god," he whispered, "you've bottled the sky." He dismounted, walking toward the shattered wall. "How many of these can you make?" "As many as the forge can stomach," I said. "Then you'll have everything you need." That was how it began, the war machine of the old world reborn in the new. Within a fortnight, the first line of cannon stood atop the castle walls. We trained the artillery crews day and night. I taught them words they'd never heard before: trajectory, pressure, range. The princess visited often, observing quietly, her presence both shield and reminder. Once, after a long night of testing, she approached me as the moon painted the courtyard silver. "When you fire them," she said, "you never flinch. It's as if you already know their song." "I do," I said. "It's a song that never stops playing once you've heard it." She looked at me with something between pity and understanding. "Do you fear it?" "Every time." That answer seemed to please her. Not because it comforted, but because it told her I hadn't lost my humanity yet. War came at dawn 2 weeks later. The enemy marched under red banners that rippled like fresh wounds. Their siege engines rolled across the plains, wooden beasts of burden armed with fire and iron. I stood on the ramparts beside Rorik, the old captain's face grim as weathered steel. "They outnumber us 5-1, he said. "Then we'll make the field smaller," I replied. When the first wave advanced, I gave the order. "Light them!" The cannons roared. Fire leapt from the walls. The earth shook beneath us. Boulders and iron balls tore through enemy lines, scattering men like leaves in a storm. The sound was not battle. It was apocalypse. The soldiers behind me shouted my name as if I were a savior. But when I looked down at the valley, all I saw were bodies and smoke. For the first time since crossing into this world, I truly felt the weight of what I'd done. I hadn't changed history. I'd accelerated it. Still, we won that day. The enemy retreated, leaving their dead and wounded. The kingdom rejoiced. Bells rang until the towers trembled. The king himself embraced me in the courtyard, proclaiming me Lord of Fire. That night there was a feast, wine, songs, the illusion of safety. Yet amid the celebration, I caught the princess watching me from across the hall. Her smile was faint, her eyes searching. When she finally approached, her voice was quiet enough that only I could hear. "You saved the kingdom," she said. "For now. You should be proud." "I am, in theory," she tilted her head. "You speak like a man who's won and lost at once." "Because I have. I built something unstoppable, and now everyone wants a piece of it." Her expression softened. "You could have refused." "No," I said, "not when the alternative was seeing you fall." That silenced her. For a moment, neither of us looked away. Then she whispered, "And when peace returns, what will you build then?" I stared at the flickering candles. "Maybe something that heals instead of burns." She touched my arm lightly. "Then I hope peace comes soon." But peace, as always, is the brief lie between battles. 3 days later, emissaries arrived with demands of surrender. The king laughed them out of the hall. The same night, assassins slipped into the barracks. Our own men, bribed and desperate. Harlan was found dead beside the forge, his throat cut. I buried him myself. The smoke from the pyre mixed with the smell of gunpowder and grief. That night, I stood alone on the ramparts. The cannons loomed in the dark like sleeping beasts. Below, the city glowed with torchlight, celebrating survival, blind to the cost. I realized then that history was repeating itself exactly as it always had. A new weapon didn't end war. It only gave it sharper teeth. When the princess found me there, I didn't turn. "Your invention saved us," she said softly. "But it also frightens them. My father sees it in his dreams." "He should," I said. "It's a mirror, and every king hates his own reflection." She stood beside me, silent for a long time. The wind tugged at her cloak, carrying the scent of roses and smoke. Finally she asked, "And what do you see in it?" "Myself," I said. "A man who's cursed to keep repeating the same mistake." She looked at me, her eyes glinting in the torchlight. "Then let this world be the one where you break the pattern." Her words were soft, but they struck harder than any cannon I'd built. I turned to face her, the only person here who still saw me as something human. "And if I fail, then at least fail for something worth dying for." She left me with that. I stood there until the stars faded and the first light of dawn touched the mountains. The city below was quiet again, but the smoke from the battlefield still hung in the air, a thin gray ribbon between victory and guilt. I knew what came next. The king would reward me. The court would envy me. And sooner or later, they'd cage the thing they feared most. Not the cannon. Me. Victory, it turned out, was just another kind of prison. After the siege, the capital celebrated for 7 nights. Drums thundered through the streets, fires burned in the squares, and the people shouted my name like it belonged to a myth instead of a man. Alden the Fireborn, they called me, the man who commands thunder. But when the celebrations ended, silence returned, the kind that tastes of iron and distrust. The king summoned me to the throne room on the 8th day. He greeted me not as a hero, but as a problem waiting to be solved. "You have done what no army in our history could," he said. "You've made the impossible real." I bowed, waiting for the other half of the sentence, the part that always came after praise. He didn't disappoint. "Which means," he continued, "that the balance of the world has shifted, and anything that shifts must be anchored or destroyed." I met his eyes. "You fear your own weapon, your majesty." "I fear what men will do with it when I am gone." He rose, his voice hardening. "You will remain under my protection and my watch. No man should wield such power without the crown's blessing. In other words, gilded chains." I wanted to argue, to remind him that knowledge can't be caged, but the memory of Harlan's blood kept my anger in check. Maybe the king was right to fear what he didn't understand. Still, that night, the locks on my door clicked from the outside. So began my captivity, comfortable, silent, suffocating. The princess visited often, always at dusk, always without guards. She brought books, questions, and sometimes music. A small harp she played softly by the window while I pretended to read. One evening she caught me sketching again. Not weapons this time, but a clock. "Another device?" she asked. "A harmless one," I said. "Measures time." She smiled faintly. "Do you wish to control that as well?" "Not control," I said. "Just understand it." She leaned closer, studying the gears I'd drawn. "Does your understanding ever bring you peace?" I hesitated. "No, just clarity. And clarity's a lonely thing." She looked at me for a long time, her fingers brushing the parchment's edge. "You remind me of my mother," she said quietly. "She loved the stars because they never lied. She said truth has no loyalty to kings." That sounds like something dangerous to say aloud. "She was dangerous," the princess said, and for the first time, I saw pain flicker in her composure. "She died for it." We sat in silence after that, two prisoners in different cages. Weeks passed. Outside, the war shifted to the northern border. Inside, I was summoned again to the council chamber. This time, the king's advisors were there, old men with eyes like vultures. On the table lay my cannon designs, spread out like evidence. One of them, a thin noble named Lord Bren, tapped the drawings with his ring. "These plans cannot remain in one man's hands. The guilds must copy them, distribute them to our allies." "Mass production," I said flatly. "You'd flood the continent with fire." Bren sneered. "We would ensure peace through strength." I almost laughed. That's the same lie my own world told itself, right up until it burned. The king's fist struck the table. "Enough! You speak as though you come from the heavens themselves." I looked him dead in the eye. "No, your majesty. I speak as someone who's seen how easily men mistake power for salvation." The room went still. For a moment, I thought I'd sealed my fate. But instead of rage, the king only sighed. "You think me a tyrant," he said, "but I am a man who must choose which kind of monster to be." That line stayed with me long after I left the chamber. The next night, the princess came again, but not to talk. She wore a hood, her face pale under candlelight. "They mean to take your designs," she whispered, "to make more cannons without you." I already suspected as much. "Then soon they won't need me." "That's why I'm here," she said, eyes fierce. "You must destroy the blueprints before they can copy them." "Destroy my work?" I asked, half laughing. "You sound like me when I still had a conscience." "This isn't about conscience," she said. "It's about survival. You don't know what my father's council will do once they have your secrets." Her voice trembled slightly, but her resolve didn't. For the first time, I realized she wasn't the protected one anymore. She was protecting me. We worked through the night, burning the copies, melting the etched plates, scattering ashes from the tower window into the wind. Watching the pages curl and blacken, I felt both relief and loss, as if erasing a piece of myself. When it was done, she turned to me, soot on her hands. "Now you are free," she said. I looked at the flames. "Freedom's never free. Someone always pays." She met my gaze. "Then let it be me." Her voice was soft, but something inside me broke at the sound. I reached for her hand just once, and for the briefest heartbeat, she didn't pull away. Then footsteps echoed from below. We stepped apart as the door burst open. Rorik entered, sword drawn. His face was hard as stone. "The king demands your presence, Alden." The princess spoke first. "He's done nothing wrong." Rorik's eyes flicked to her, then to the burning ashes on the floor. "That will not be my decision, Your Highness." I turned to her quietly. "Don't speak for me. Not this time." She looked like she wanted to argue, but I shook my head. "Tell your father," I said to Rorik. "I'll answer his questions." He nodded, motioning for the guards. As they led me away, I caught one last glimpse of her, standing by the window, the fire behind her painting her in gold and sorrow. They didn't torture me. The king was too clever for that. Instead, he offered something far more dangerous: temptation. "You'll remain under house guard," he said. "You'll continue to serve, design, teach, advise, but your allegiance must be absolute, no more secrets. And if I refuse," he smiled thinly, "then the princess's safety cannot be guaranteed." So that was the bargain, my freedom for her life. I bowed slowly. "Then I serve." He leaned back on his throne, satisfied. "History will remember your loyalty, Alden." I almost told him the truth, that history remembers no one loyal to kings, but I kept the words where they belonged, buried. That night in my chamber, I stared out over the city, my cannons glinting on the walls, silent but waiting. The stars looked close enough to touch. The wind carried the faint echo of the princess's harp. And in that moment, I understood the cruel beauty of the bargain I'd made. To save her, I would have to become exactly what I feared most: the monster with a conscience. The first warning came with the smell of smoke, not the familiar scent of the forge or campfire, but the sharp, dry stench of burning oil, the kind that clings to everything it touches. I was in my quarters when the bells began to toll. 3 notes repeated, the alarm for treachery inside the walls. By the time I reached the courtyard, the castle was chaos. Servants ran barefoot through the smoke. Guards shouted orders that vanished under the roar of fire. Arrows whistled from the shadows. Someone had brought the war into the king's own heart. I found Rorik bleeding on the steps, his sword slick with blood that wasn't all his. "The royal wing," he rasped. "They've come for the princess." I didn't wait for permission. I ran. The corridors were lit in orange and ash. The tapestries burned, curling like living things. The sound of steel and screams echoed off the stone. I knew that sound. It was the sound of collapse. The same note history always played before turning a page. At the grand stairwell, 2 assassins barred my path, cloaked, masked, efficient. Their blades glinted dull red in the firelight. The old instincts came alive. Not Alden's, but mine. The part of me that had survived deserts, detonations, and silence. I caught the first man's wrist mid-swing, turned his own momentum, drove his dagger into his ribs. The second lunged. I kicked his knee sideways and felt it break like dry wood. There's nothing noble in killing, only efficiency. I didn't look back. When I burst into the princess's chamber, the world slowed to the width of her breath. She stood by the window, dagger in hand, her white gown streaked with soot. 2 intruders lay dead at her feet. Her eyes widened when she saw me, not in fear but recognition. "You came." "Would have been rude not to," I said, forcing calm. "Time to go." She hesitated only long enough to grab a small satchel from her desk. "My father, we'll find him if we can, But if they reach this far, the palace is lost. The walls shuddered as something exploded below. A cannon blast. My cannon. They've turned the lower batteries, I said, realization burning through me. They're using my designs. She stared at me, horror dawning. How? The council must have copied them before we burned the plans. Another blast shook the tower. Dust fell like gray snow. I took her hand. We need to move. Now. We fled through the servant passages, narrow tunnels that smelled of stone and memory. Behind us the fire spread, devouring centuries of marble and pride. Once outside the inner walls we saw the city. Flames licked the skyline. The cannons roared again. My cannons, hurling fire into the night. It was the sound of my own sin, amplified. We reached the stables, half collapsed from the blast. I saddled 2 horses as the princess struggled to breathe through the smoke. Ride east, I said. There's a river road. Stay low until the forest. And you? I'll draw their fire. I built these weapons. They'll aim for me first. She caught my wrist before I could turn away. If you die here, this kingdom dies with you. Her eyes, fierce, unyielding, left no space for argument. So we rode together, through the burning gates, through a storm of arrows, into the black breath of the night. The air beyond the city walls was thick with ash and fear. Behind us, the castle, once a monument of stone and order, was a burning silhouette against the stars. The sound of collapsing towers followed us like a drumbeat. We didn't stop until the horizon swallowed the fire. By the riverbank, under the faint light of a broken moon, we dismounted. The horses trembled, foam on their flanks. My chest burned with the memory of the blast. The princess sank to the ground, her hands shaking. For a moment she was no royal, no symbol, just human, terrified, alive. I sat beside her. You did well back there. She let out a shaky laugh. You think this is well? It's alive. That's more than most can claim tonight. She turned to me, eyes glistening. Was this your future too? Fire and ruin? Yes, I said. Every time. Silence stretched between us. The river murmured, carrying away embers reflected in its surface. Finally, she whispered, then maybe this is where we change it. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. We built a small camp beneath an oak grove before dawn. I gathered what dry wood I could, though the smell of smoke clung to everything. When I handed her a flask of water, she caught my hand again. Gently this time. I thought I understood power, she said, but I only understood the comfort it gave, not the cost. I looked into the fire. Power's a mirror. It shows you what you really are. Most people can't stand the reflection. And you? She asked. I look at it every night, I said, and I hate what I see. The fire cracked softly between us. Then she said something I didn't expect. When my father made you his prisoner, I envied you. I turned. Envy isn't the word I'd choose. You were free in ways none of us could be, she said. You spoke the truth to him, even when it cost you everything. No one else in this kingdom dared that. Her words hit harder than any chain I'd worn. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The night wind carried the faint cry of wolves, or maybe men. I couldn't tell anymore. She eventually lay down beside the fire, exhaustion overtaking fear. As her breathing steadied, I watched the last embers rise into the sky, each one a burning star that would fade before dawn. I wondered if that's what souls looked like when they left. Sparks caught between worlds. When I finally slept, I dreamed, not of war, but of the forge. The molten metal glowed again, shifting like liquid memory. From its light, 2 shapes emerged, one of fire, one of shadow. They stood facing each other, both holding the same weapon. Then the fire spoke with my voice. One of us must stop, the shadow answered. Then stop me. When I woke, the princess was already watching the horizon. The dawn was a dull red, the kind that promises nothing good. They'll come for us, she said. I know. What will you do when they find us? I tightened the strap of my gauntlet. What I always do. Try to fix what I broke. She looked at me for a long time, then nodded. Then I'll stand with you. I almost told her to run, to save herself, to disappear. But looking into her eyes, I knew she wouldn't. So instead, I said the only thing that mattered. Then whatever happens next, I whispered, it won't be history repeating. It'll be us rewriting it. The wind carried the smell of smoke again, faint but rising. The past was catching up, and somewhere behind that crimson dawn, I heard the first rumble of pursuit, cannons in the distance, calling their maker home. The road east wound through the forest like a scar, narrow, unmarked, and endless. For days we traveled beneath a canopy of pines that shut out the sun, following the river's edge toward the highlands. The princess no longer rode like royalty. She rode like someone who had forgotten what silk and ceremony were. I suppose that made us equals at last, two ghosts of a fallen kingdom. The forest was kind to us in its silence. No horns, no fire, no court whispers, just the sound of hooves and wind. Still, every night when we made camp, I'd wake at the faintest crack of a branch, hand on my knife, half expecting to see soldiers or assassins stepping from the dark. On the fifth night, I caught sight of the mountains, gray giants capped with white. That meant we were close to the borderlands, where few dared live. The princess stared at them as if seeing a painting she'd dreamed of once. Do you think there's life beyond them? She asked. Always is, I said. Whether it welcomes us is another question. We reached a small village tucked into a valley of ash trees. Farmers, miners, and wanderers who looked at us with equal suspicion and pity. They knew the fall of the capital already. News travels faster than mercy. I offered labor in exchange for shelter. A blacksmith named Corin took us in, his forge barely larger than the one I'd once built under the castle. He had one good eye and the kind of hands that knew the weight of mistakes. You work the metal, stranger? He asked, testing me. I used to, I said. Too much of it, he chuckled. Then you'll fit right in. And so began our exile. I found comfort in work again. The simple rhythm of hammer and anvil, the heat that obeyed no king. Corin taught me the old ways of tempering, how to listen to the steel's voice instead of forcing it. It was humbling. In the capital, I'd built weapons meant to conquer. Here I repaired plows and horseshoes. For the first time in years, the fire felt clean. The princess, no, Alara now, as she insisted, helped where she could. She learned to cook over open flame, to sew torn clothes, to wash the soot from her hands without complaint. The villagers called her the quiet woman with the strange eyes. They didn't know who she was, and I didn't tell them. At night, we sat by the forge and watched the sparks rise into the dark. Sometimes she'd ask me about my world. Other times, she just listened to the fire breathe. Was it beautiful? She asked once. The place you came from. Sometimes, I said, but mostly it was clever. She frowned. Cleverness without kindness is a disease. I smiled. We were terminal then. Her laugh was small but real. Weeks turned into months. The seasons changed. The forest thawed, and the river swelled with meltwater. For a time, I dared to believe we'd been forgotten. Then one morning, Corin brought news from the traders. The capital had fallen entirely. The king was dead. The council had declared a new sovereign, one of the nobles who'd stolen my cannon designs. The new regime promised an age of steel. Alara went pale when she heard it. They're mass-producing your weapons, she said. I nodded slowly. History wastes no time. She gripped the table. We have to stop them. I stared into the forge. And do what? Build something worse? No, she said. Something better. Her certainty startled me. You still believe there's a better version of this story? She met my gaze. If you don't, then why are you still breathing? It wasn't anger in her voice. It was faith, the kind that scares a man more than hatred ever could. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat outside under the stars, tracing constellations that didn't belong to my sky. Somewhere behind those pinpricks of light, my own world might still exist. Or maybe it was just another ruin. I thought of the first time I lit the cannon, the thrill of it, the certainty that I was doing something historic. Now I wondered if that was the moment I damned not just myself, but both worlds. When Alara joined me by the fire, she didn't speak. She just placed something in my hand, a small gear, polished smooth. I found it in the forge, she said. It's from one of your machines, isn't it? I nodded. An old dream. Then build a new one, she whispered. The next day I began again, but this time not with powder or steel. I built a watermill to grind grain faster for the villagers. I taught Corin's apprentices how to use levers and pulleys to lift heavy loads. I drew plans for a clock tower to track the seasons. Word spread quickly. People came from neighboring villages to see the man who builds without killing. Ilara smiled whenever they said that, though I knew she understood the irony better than anyone. She and I walked together often, through the fields, along the river, through the quiet moments where the world seemed to forgive us. There was a gentleness between us now, the kind born not of passion but of survival. But peace never holds. One night, as I returned from the forge, I saw lights flickering along the ridge, torches moving in rows. Riders. Too many to be traitors. Corin ran to me, panic in his one good eye. Scouts from the new capital, he said. They're hunting deserters and rebels. I knew what that meant. They were hunting her. Ilara stood by the doorway, already calm. We can't run forever, she said. No, I said, but we can choose where to make our stand. I looked at the forge, my first sanctuary in this world, and knew what I had to do. At dawn, I sent Corin and his family away, gave them what coin we'd saved, and told them to follow the river south. Then I and Ilara began to dismantle the forge, piece by piece. I used its parts to build something crude but powerful, a chain of pressure tubes buried under the hill, connected by ignition fuses. Not a weapon of conquest, a trap of refusal. When the riders arrived, they would find no invention to steal, no kingdom to reclaim, only ashes that would die with me. Ilara watched silently as I worked, her face pale in the gray light. You're building another fire, she said. This one burns the right direction, I replied. She stepped close, touching my hand. Then let me stand with you. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her to live, to carry on the small light we'd found. But I'd long ago learned that she did not ask for permission. So I just said, then together. By nightfall, the torches appeared again. Closer now, crawling down the ridge like a serpent of flame. The air smelled of war. Ilara stood beside me, hair catching the glow of the forge's last fire. Do you think they'll remember us? She asked. No, I said. But maybe they'll remember the silence after. She smiled, tired, radiant, unafraid. When the first horsemen broke through the trees, I pulled the ignition cord. The hill erupted in light. The last thing I remember was her hand in mine, the air splitting open, the world turning white. I woke to silence. Not death, not yet. Just a world emptied of everything but wind. The valley was gone, the riders gone, the forge gone. Only the river remained, red under the morning sun. Beside me, Ilara lay still, her face peaceful, untouched by flame. I closed her eyes, and for the first time in 2 lives, I prayed. not for forgiveness, but for meaning. Then I stood one last time and began walking toward the mountains, because even in ruin, the world kept moving, and so did I. The mountains welcomed no one. The air was thin, sharp enough to cut the lungs. For days I climbed through switchback trails carved by wind and time, leaving behind the valley that had swallowed everything I loved. The fire still haunted the horizon, a dull red bruise against the morning sky. But I didn't look back. The dead deserve peace, even from our eyes. I carried little with me: a cloak, a pack of dried meat, and the princess's ring, a small circle of silver that had survived when everything else hadn't. It hung from a cord around my neck, cold against my skin, pulsing faintly with memory. Each night, as I built a small fire under the stars, I caught myself speaking to her. Not aloud, not quite, just quiet fragments. You were right about kindness. You were right about me. The wind never answered, but it didn't need to. Silence was honest enough. On the seventh day, I found a monastery built into the cliffs. Old stone, older faith. Monks in gray robes moved like shadows between prayer and work. Their eyes were neither welcoming nor suspicious, only aware. I stayed among them in exchange for labor, mending tools, repairing mills, teaching them how to harness the wind through simple turbines. They called me the Maker. None asked my name, and I didn't offer it. In a world that had forgotten me, anonymity was mercy. Months passed that way, peace of a kind. My hands learned gentleness again. The forge inside me, that terrible pulse that demanded creation, began to quiet, until the day the war reached even here. It began with riders in the valley below, banners black and red, the emblem of the new king, scouts maybe, or executioners. The abbot came to me that night. His beard was white, his voice steady. "They say you once built thunder," he said. I stared into the fire. That was another life. "Then why does it still burn in your eyes?" "Because it never goes out. Because once you've seen the world break by your own hand, you start recognizing cracks everywhere." I looked at him and said, "If they come here, your walls won't stop them." He nodded. "And yet, walls are all we have." He turned to leave, then added, "If your knowledge can protect life, perhaps it was not given to you by mistake." That night I sat in the chapel, surrounded by candles that breathed like a living sea. I thought about Alara, how she had stood against kings, against history itself, with nothing but conviction. She hadn't died for a weapon. She died believing that mercy was a form of rebellion. And I realized I couldn't keep hiding. The next morning I began again, this time not to destroy but to shield. I used what little metal the monks had, fashioned plates curved like petals, meant to absorb and scatter impact. I showed them how to create smoke screens with damp powder, how to build signal mirrors to blind enemy archers. Small things, defensive things, a refusal to kill that still fought back. The monks worked beside me without question. Faith can be an efficient kind of engineering when properly directed. Then came the letter. A lone messenger rode up the mountain, bearing the new king's seal. His words were trembling but rehearsed. "Lord Alden the Fireborn is commanded to return to the capital," he read. "His talents are required for the greater peace of the realm." I almost laughed. Greater peace. Those were always the words before the next war. I didn't answer immediately. The messenger, clearly terrified, added, "If you refuse, the king will send men, many men." "Then tell him," I said quietly, "that thunder doesn't answer to crowns anymore." The messenger fled before nightfall. They came 3 weeks later, an army of iron and arrogance climbing the mountain in gleaming rows. Cannons mounted on wheeled carriages. My cannons, modified, multiplied, baptized in royal insignia. From the monastery walls, I watched them ascend. The monks prayed. I prepared. When the first shots fired, the sound shook the stones beneath us. But our smoke screens bloomed. Our shields held. The cannon's fire scattered against the cliffs, echoing like a storm trying to strike its own reflection. Still, I knew we couldn't last. Not against what I'd created. So I made a choice. If the world demanded its fire, I would give it one final time, but on my terms. In the cellar beneath the monastery, I'd been building something for months. A containment chamber of metal and glass, designed not to explode outward but inward. A reverse engine, a fire that consumed itself. When the king's army breached the gates, I descended into that room. The monks followed, unwilling to leave. "Go," I told them. "This isn't your burden." One of them, the youngest, asked, "What is it you mean to do?" "End it," I said. I placed Alara's ring into the center of the device, a small, meaningless gesture, but it steadied my hands. Outside, the cannons roared again. The walls trembled. Dust fell like gray rain. I whispered a final line into the hum of the machine. "If history insists on fire, then let it eat itself." Then I pulled the lever. The world turned white. No explosion, no heat, just light folding in on itself, a soundless collapse. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the monastery. No sky, no mountain, no air, only light. In front of me stood Alara, as she had been before the flames. Hair unburned, eyes calm, wearing no crown. I tried to speak, but she shook her head. "You've done enough." "Am I dead?" "Not yet," she said, "but close enough to see both sides." I looked down. My hands glowed faintly like glass catching sunlight. "What happens now?" "That depends," she said. "Do you still think you were sent here by accident?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. She smiled sadly. "Then maybe it's time to stop asking why and start asking what for." The light around her brightened. "You've built enough machines, Alden. Now build something human." Her voice faded, but the warmth remained. Not heat, but understanding. Then the light broke, and I fell. When I woke, I was lying on cold marble, the smell of antiseptic, the hiss of a monitor. My world again. Machines beeped softly beside me. A nurse shouted for a doctor. I stared at the ceiling, white, perfect, sterile, and wondered if the fire had ever happened at all. But when I lifted my hand, something gleamed against my palm, a small circle of silver, warm to the touch. Alara's ring. I closed my fingers around it, and for the first time since waking in that other life, I wept. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd finally understood. That fire isn't what destroys us, it's what reveals us. When you've seen the end of a world, you stop mistaking silence for peace. For weeks after the mountain burned, I lived in the hollow of its shadow, a survivor without a side. The monastery was gone, the monks scattered like ash in the wind. Yet the world still turned. Empires don't die in explosions. They linger, pretending they're still alive. The capital rebuilt itself, slower this time, uglier. Rumors reached me through traders. The new king had consolidated power, renamed the empire the Dominion of Fire. My cannons had become symbols now, paraded through the streets as miracles of divine will. They were building more, dozens, hundreds. It was almost impressive how fast humans learned to multiply mistakes. I should have walked away. I'd already given too much blood to both time and arrogance. But each night, when the wind hissed through the mountain stones, I heard her voice again, Alara's, the way she'd said, "Build something human." I couldn't leave her story ending in smoke, so I went back. The capital was unrecognizable. The once white towers were blackened with soot, banners of crimson and gold hanging like scars over their walls. Soldiers in new armor patrolled the gates. Armor forged from my own designs, improved, industrialized. At night, the forges lit the skyline like a second sun. Smoke rose where faith used to be. I hid among the laborers, just another soot-stained man hauling barrels of powder. The air tasted of iron and ambition. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The Grand Arsenal, a fortress built on the bones of the old courtyard where the first cannon had roared. Inside, rows upon rows of cannons waited, perfect and monstrous. Each bore my signature spiral grooves, each polished to an almost sacred sheen. They called it the God Forge, and standing before it, commanding its engineers, was a man I knew too well, Lord Bren, the one who'd once sneered at my dangerous ideas. Now dressed in royal black, his chest gleaming with medals. He didn't recognize me at first. My beard was long, my face burned by mountain sun. But when I spoke, he froze. "You've improved the design," I said. His eyes widened. "You're supposed to be dead." "I've been trying," I said, "but your work keeps calling me back." He smirked. "You should be proud. The Dominion thrives because of you." "Thrives?" I looked at the cannons. "Or decays louder?" He shrugged. "History doesn't ask which, only who." There it was, the disease of cleverness again. "I came to see your masterpiece," I said, "the largest of them all, the one they call the Titan." He laughed softly. "It fires tomorrow at the rebellion in the east. The king himself will attend." Perfect. That night, I slipped through the forges like a ghost. The guards were lazy. Victory always breeds arrogance. Inside the Titan's chamber, I found it. A cannon the size of a ship's hull, resting on steel rails. It was beautiful in the way disasters are. Perfect engineering with no conscience. I ran my fingers over the smooth iron, whispering the names of every soul who had died, because I'd thought knowledge alone could save them. Then I began to work. I rewired the ignition system, adjusted the pressure valves, and rerouted the venting chambers inward. A small alteration, invisible to the eye, catastrophic in practice. When fired, the Titan wouldn't destroy its target. It would consume itself, implode, swallowing its own fire. I stayed until the first hint of dawn touched the rafters. Before I left, I carved something into the metal plate beside the trigger. For Ilara, the fire that learned to weep. The next morning, the city gathered in the royal square. Trumpets blared. Priests chanted blessings to sanctify the weapon. The king appeared on a raised platform, his robes heavy with embroidered suns. And there, standing beside him, was Lord Bren, beaming like a prophet unveiling the divine. I watched from the crowd, just another face in the sea. "The Titan," Bren declared, "shall cleanse the realm of its enemies and bring everlasting peace." Peace, the word again, hollow as ever. They wheeled the Titan into position, aimed toward the distant hills where the rebels supposedly hid. The air thickened with awe and terror. I closed my eyes. When Bren pulled the lever, the world held its breath. Then came the sound. Not thunder, not explosion. Something deeper. A roar that folded in on itself. The cannon's body shuddered, twisted, then collapsed inward like a dying star. The shock wave tore through the platform. Fire spiraled upward, devouring its own creator. When the smoke cleared, the Titan was gone. So was the king. So was Bren. Only silence remained, the kind that erases names. I left before the panic spread. The city's screams followed me into the hills. By dusk, I reached the old riverbank, where years ago Alar and I had watched the embers float downstream. The water was lower now, slower, reflecting the blood-red sky. I took the ring from my neck and placed it on a stone. "Your kingdom's free now," I said softly. "Free of kings, free of me." The river didn't answer, but the wind carried something gentle, like the faint echo of her laughter. That night I built one last fire, Not for forging, not for war, just for warmth. As I sat beside it, I felt the world loosen its grip, time itself exhaling. The stars overhead shimmered faintly, each one a fragment of every choice I'd made. I thought about how strange it was that even in ruin, creation still felt like prayer. Maybe Alara had been right. Maybe the only way to defeat fire was to understand it, to hold it close enough to see your own reflection in the flame and not look away. The wind shifted. The fire bent toward me, soft, harmless. And in its glow, I saw her again, just for a moment. She wasn't saying goodbye. She was saying finally. Then the flame went out. I used to think the end of a story was the moment the hero dies. A clean fade to black, music swelling, lights dimming. But endings are messier than that. They linger. They echo. They follow you even when the fire's gone out. When I opened my eyes, I was staring at a white ceiling. Too white, too perfect. The sound of machines hummed steady and low. The rhythm of a world that had forgotten silence. My chest ached, every breath wrapped in wires and antiseptic air. Then a voice. "Captain Ward? Can you hear me?" I turned my head. A woman in scrubs stood beside the bed, her face soft with cautious relief. "You were in an explosion," she said. "Desert convoy 6 months ago. We thought—" She hesitated, as if afraid of finishing the sentence. I didn't answer. My eyes drifted to the window. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass, neon veins pulsing in the night. So familiar, too familiar. I was back. But back didn't mean what it used to. The doctors called it a miracle. They said I'd survived burns that should have ended me, that my heart had stopped twice on the table. They told me I was lucky. I wanted to laugh, but the word lucky tasted wrong. In the nights that followed, when the machines quieted, I dreamed, or remembered. The castle walls, the forge, the mountain, the fire, her face, her voice, Ilara. Every detail burned inside me with impossible precision, not as fantasy, not as dream, but as history. My hands still remembered how to shape steel by instinct. My chest still carried the phantom ache of an arrow wound that never existed here. I started sketching again, just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The lines came easily. The first cannon, the clock tower, the watermill. And in the corner of every page, without meaning to, I drew her sigil, a silver hawk clutching a sword. The nurses found the drawings one morning and whispered that maybe the explosion had changed something in my brain. Maybe I was imagining a world that never was. Maybe, but the ring still hung from my neck, the same small silver band, its surface etched with a hawk's feather, impossibly real. They ran every scan they could think of. No one could explain it. They said trauma does strange things to memory. They said grief can create ghosts. I let them believe that. Weeks later, when they released me, I stepped out into a city that felt more foreign than the kingdom I'd left behind. Screens glowed in every window. Cars moved in silent precision. People spoke quickly, eyes down, tethered to machines brighter than their faces. Progress, perfected and hollow. I wandered through it like a relic misplaced by time. At night, I'd walk to the old pier by the bay. The wind off the water still smelled faintly of oil and salt. The waves glimmered like fragments of broken glass. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and pretend it was the river, the same one that had carried the reflection of our fire into the dark. That was where I met her again. Or thought I did. She stood at the end of the pier, hair caught by the wind, wearing a long gray coat. For a moment, she was just a silhouette against the city lights. My pulse stopped. When she turned, the face was different, older, unfamiliar. But her eyes, they were the same impossible color. "Beautiful night," she said. Her voice was calm, melodic, the kind that carries weight even when saying nothing. I nodded, unable to speak. She studied me for a moment, as if measuring something unseen. Then she smiled faintly and walked away. When she passed under the streetlight, something silver glinted at her throat, a pendant shaped like a hawk. I stood there long after she vanished. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. Maybe some things refuse to stay dead. I began teaching again, quietly, anonymously. A small workshop on the edge of the city where veterans and engineers came to rebuild their hands and their purpose. We repaired machines, not for war, but for healing, prosthetics, rescue drones, irrigation systems. I made sure of one thing: no more weapons. Sometimes, late at night, when the apprentices had gone home, I'd light a small forge in the corner. The flame flickered gently, patient, almost human. I'd whisper to it the way I used to. Not prayers, not apologies, just truths. Fire, after all, doesn't judge. It only remembers who feeds it. And every time I looked into that flame, I saw her face. Not as a ghost, but as a mirror of everything she'd taught me. Months passed. The city kept its rhythm. Life, as it tends to, pretended to move on. Then one evening, as I locked the workshop, I heard a sound behind me, a faint hum, like gears turning in air. I turned. No one there. Only the half-open door of my forge, light flickering through the gap. Inside, the fire burned brighter than I'd left it, too bright, steady and silent. On the anvil lay something that hadn't been there before, a small folded piece of parchment, edges singed but unburned. My hands trembled as I opened it. There were only 6 words written in delicate, familiar script. You kept your promise. So did I. I stood there staring at it until the flame dimmed back to normal. The ring on my neck grew warm, just once, like a heartbeat. Sometimes when I closed the workshop late, I still walk down to the pier. The city lights blur on the water, and the wind tastes the same as it did that night by the river. I tell her what's happened. The students, the inventions, the small mercies I've learned to build instead of destroy. And I swear, if I listen closely enough, I can hear her voice in the tide. Not all fires burn to ash, she says. Some burn to remember. I don't know if it's real. Maybe that doesn't matter anymore. Because every morning, when the sun rises over the skyline, I see the faintest outline of a hawk in the clouds. Silver, silent, eternal. And I know she's somewhere in that light, still watching, still waiting, still human.